Thank you all for coming out, and thank you to everybody involved for having me here this week. As you all may know, the past 3 days I've been leading a seminar on the Popol Vuh, which I understand to be a creation story that comes out of crisis. Unlike a lot of other creation stories, which begin in primordial cosmic darkness, the Popol Vuh, Quiche Mayan creation story, is a creation story that begins in political darkness. It says, here in the times of the teaching of Christ, here in Christendom, we will bring light out of the sky, we will bring the sun into existence. Right? It's a very strange place in which to begin a creation story, but that strangeness is something that animates my work the whole way through, whether I'm working on creation stories, dreams, non-alphabetical sign systems like pictography, hieroglyphs, Khipu. It's this idea that scenes of crisis are also opportunities for tremendous transformation and creation, and that's what I'm here to share with you today, is a story that dramatizes some of these ideas. I'm calling it a story emphatically, even though I used to call it a lecture, I used to call it a talk, I used to call it a paper. And there were a bunch of conceptual limitations that I came to identify in thinking of it as an academic presentation. So I've stopped calling it all those things, and I've started to call what I'm going to share with you today a story, because I feel that its interpersonal dynamics are more palpable if I tell you, I'm going to tell you a story. My story begins in the work that I was doing when I finished my book, Signs of the Americas, this book on the non-alphabetical sign systems of the Americas and their contemporary literatures and arts. But before I started and wrote my book on the Popol Vuh, when I thought that I was going to be writing this book about risk and divination. I wanted to write a book about divination, and that led me to an analysis, an inquiry about risk. But then when you start thinking about risk, it's a very big thing. Right? That's the prefrontal cortex. It's like half of human intellection is thinking about risk. So I had to kind of encapsulate it somehow. So I started to think about risk and migration. And these were some of the works that I was going to look at that time, that I was going to write about, which are works that are about migration, but that also are about divination, right? Or that use divination in interesting ways to recast, refigure, rethink risk. I'm giving you the academic side of it, right? But the real side of this story is that, and I'm telling you a story now. It's not an academic paper, being completely honest. This project that I'm going to talk to you about, these geoglyphs in the Sonoran Desert, the Blythe intaglios, came to me when I appeared on Ancient Aliens. You all know what Ancient Aliens is, right? This kind of quasi-racist show about, the ancient Americas, and, nobody could have done anything without the help of aliens. Anyways, they asked me to come on the show and talk about geoglyphs. And I said, sure, I'll come and bring some truth to the matter, right? They interviewed me for 90 minutes. So already I sat, and I was like, oh, cool, I want to see the Adornian culture industry from the inside. So they flew me out to LA. I was like, cool, being driven around in a limo. I was curious, right? The anthropologist in me wanted to see that. But they interviewed me for 90 minutes. They used the 45 seconds when I said the words outer space. I was like, they were just waiting for me to say outer space, but whatever. This show and my appearance on it brought me into conversation with the caretaker for these glyphs, whose name is Alfredo Figueroa. This is Alfredo Figueroa. He's an octogenarian activist. He's an octogenarian, dang, why is this jumping around? He's an octogenarian activist. He's been involved in the Chicano civil rights movement since the 1970s, 1960s, on the lines with Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta. And in his 80s, he and his family have dedicated themselves to caring for these giant geoglyphs in the Sonoran Desert on the border between California and Arizona, called the Blythe intaglios, these giant geoglyphs that are carved into the earth outside Blythe. He was also on the show trying to just, talk about these glyphs. My relationship to him began with a few phone conversations, after which he invited me to come and check out the Blythe intaglios, and very quickly I came to understand. So I drove out to see him in Blythe, and we went on these hikes out into the desert to see these geoglyphs, and very quickly it became apparent to me why he was on Ancient Aliens, right? It's because he believes, right? He fundamentally believes that this is the site of creation of all humanity, that these are the caves of Chicomostoc from which humanity emerged in a hole in the earth, and this is the site of historical Aztlan, right? The originary home of the Aztecs before their migrations down into central Mexico, right? And the subsequent founding of Tenochtitlan, aka Mexico City. And he's a raconteur. He will talk and talk and talk and won't let you get a word in edgewise. He's a fundamentalist in his own way, but he's also deeply charming, right? You want to keep listening. And still, right, as he was telling me these stories and returning to this idea of crisis swirling around creativity, right? He's telling me these stories that are about the creation of humanity, right? Not the creation of the Aztecs or the Nahuas, but the creation of all humanity from a hole in the earth, right? In these Santa Maria Mountains, outside of Blythe. It occurs to me that this is the very desert funnel through which the United States enacts its cynical policy of prevention through deterrence, right? Basically enlisting the desert heat and hostility to do its dirty work for it of killing migrants, right? So I have this dichotomy in my mind where this is a scene of literal death, right? Of migratory death, of cynical border policy that I'm learning of as a site of creation. Right? And my question is, what do I do with these two polarities, right? Thinking about crisis and creativity, desperation and death, and world creation and life. A few more images of the evidence that he brings to bear to not only convince me that this is the literal site of the emergence of humanity from a hole in the earth in the Big Maria Mountains, but also to demonstrate the manifold appearance, presence of creation stories in the Americas that lead immediately to a scene of migration. You find these creation stories that lead to scenes of migration in everything from the Popol Vuh to the Nahua codices to N. Scott Momaday, Kiowa novelist and philosopher, N. Scott Momaday's Way to Rainy Mountain. It just cuts across the creation stories of the Americas where people emerge into migration. Right? And I'm thinking, well, what does it mean to emerge into migration in a scene of the literal death of migration? In what ways is migration attempting, right, to be recast? In what ways are these agents in the desert, Figueroa and his family, attempting to recast migration as a source of creativity and not just crisis, as a scene of world creation and not just death? One very literal way that they are trying to do so are through an organization called the Peace and Dignity Journeys. Maybe some of you have heard of the Peace and Dignity Journeys. It started in 1992 as a counter-celebration to the 500-year anniversary of Christopher Columbus's arrival to the Americas, 1492, 1992. And the Peace and Dignity Journeys were meant to emphasize indigenous rights of movement and connectivity across the hemisphere. And how they did that was through a series of relay runners that began in Alaska in the north and Tierra del Fuego in the south. And they would relay a baton carrying condor feathers from the south and eagle feathers from the north to emphasize what Chadwick Allen, indigenous scholar, has called transindigeneity, right? Rights to movement on this hemisphere, both literal movement, but also intellectual and philosophical movement. And I'd like to play a clip from these Peace and Dignity Journeys to just sort of demonstrate what they were and to kind of re-emphasize what I've told you about them with regard to rights of movement.
August 15th, 1992, Crestone, Colorado. The Peace and Dignity Journey is breaking camp, making ready to move on to San Luis, then on to Taos, New Mexico. The journey is a spiritual relay run to celebrate the Native American nation's 500 years of survival with peace and dignity. The prophecy of the eagle and condor says that at this time all the indigenous peoples in the Western Hemisphere will be reunited in a spiritual way to heal the nations and to begin working toward a better future. Since this 1992 run, journeys have been held every 4 years, beginning with indigenous runners on opposite ends of the continents, from Chicxulub, Alaska, and Tierra del Fuego, Argentina. This leg of the run has come down from Alaska, picking up people from various native nations along the way. The goal is to be at Teotihuacan on October 12th, Columbus Day.
Please pay attention to what is going on.
Is everybody on this list that's going to run?
I'm going to skip ahead just so you can see a little bit of the running.
15.
There you go. The elder Figueroa and his family have been involved as organizers of these Peace and Dignity Journeys since their inception, and in their many instantiations. They've been happening every 4 years since 1992, approximately. I don't know how COVID has disrupted them or not. I haven't participated. I was planning to get involved, but then COVID hit. But this is all to tell you that Alfredo Figueroa's son, who was a runner in these Peace and Dignity Journeys, then became central to my understanding of the creation stories of the Sonoran Desert, the scenes of creation amidst the crisis of migratory death, when on a kind of hilltop that we had hiked up to, he started to share with me some of the walking songs that he collected as he followed and went with the relay runners, right, down to Teotihuacan. And the song that I want to share with you today, and again, a reason why I feel better telling this as a story rather than delivering it as an academic paper, because I feel it gives greater respect to tell it as a story, greater respect to the indigenous song, is a Yucatec Maya walking song. And Chuy, Jesus Figueroa is his name. Chuy's going to tell us what this song means. Here I am, here we are, here I am, here we are, we go forward together, we go forward together. And it's a walking song that he learns in what he calls Chumash country, Santa Barbara, California. And what struck me about this song was that in a very direct way, it addresses the changed migratory patterns of the Americas today. So it used to be the case that we had urban to urban migration, right? In the 70s and 80s, people coming from San Salvador to Chicago, Mexico City to LA, so on and so forth, for the most part. Now, it's increasingly rural to urban because of climate change. So you're getting a lot more indigenous migration, right? From Central America and other countries in Latin America, from the milpas, from the farmlands, up into North America, because of the collapse of climates. Mom, a Mayan language, was the the ninth most spoken language in U.S. immigration courts in 2018 or 2019. And there are 3 Mayan languages in the top 25 most spoken languages in U.S. immigration courts. Mom was more spoken than French in U.S. immigration courts. And I'm going to play with this Yucatec walking song, which Chewy shared with me up on the hilltop. By the way, because we're on an exposed hilltop, for the beginning of the video, the wind is going to be hitting the camera, so there's a kind of noise. But as I turn around to kind of turn away from the wind, you'll be able to hear the song better.
Joe Maya. His name was Joe Maya. He lived in Chumash country. And on the Peace and Dignity journey run, 1996.
So what strikes me about this song is that at the site of so much administered death, where families suffer through heat and hatred, there persist songs whose voicing honors desert life and its continued migrations. This is not just a landscape in colonialism, it's also, importantly and continuously, a landscape in cosmogenesis. That being said, though, right, and to never let go of the fact of crisis, to never let the idea of world creation serve as a kind of outstanding comfort to us, I want to share one more song with you, which is a Lakota prison song, right, collected from one of the nearby prisons by Chewy. One of the main employers in Blythe are 2 big prisons, 2 big state prisons, Ironwood and Chuckawalla, and this is a Lakota prison song collected in the prison walls there, and it says, "When I die here behind these walls, take me back to Wankatanka, the creator." And just thinking about migration and detention in this very landscape, I'd like to play that song now.
Lakota song, prison song written in prison. It means when I die here behind these prison walls, take me back to the Black Hills, Wankatanka, the creator. I'll sing one short verse. Lakota luta wita sha ohe, mazati pi wita sha, ote na se ayaho we owe, Wankatanka wichiayo, mi hombre pete waje pa asapa mania ohe. Lakota luta wita sha ohe, Lakota luta wita sha ohe, mazati pi wita sha, ote na ze ayaho we owe, Wankatanka wichiayo, mi hombre pete waje pa asapa mania ohe. Hoi! Oh. 2 verses.
So that's my story. And I think it's a good story for setting up the things that animate, inspire, and drive me to do the work that I do. And if anything, I present it to you as an introduction to some of my poetry, which I would now like to share with you. Poetry that begins in scenes of crisis and seeks to make out of crisis some kind of regenerating creativity. I'll share a few poems in that regard from my collection, Skins of Columbus, and then some new translations from the Cantara's Mexicanos, 16th century work of colonial song. So Skins of Columbus, right, begins in crisis in as much as it seeks to try to explore the colonial subconscious, to see what of colonialism is reticulated in my mind. In practical terms, what that means is for the 3 months during which Columbus traveled the coast of the Americas, I read his journal entries before going to sleep at night for the journal for the coming day, thinking intently on the plots, symbols, images, motives, landscapes to make myself dream in Columbus's mythos, to see what of the foundational mythos of colonialism in the Americas was living in my sleeping mind. Notes throughout the night recorded my dreams. In the days I wrote the poetry, essays, and made the art of this book. And I'll just start with the first few poems of the collection. Sunday, Thursday, October 11. Roughest sea so far, tube-nosed seabirds on green reeds, a cane, a stick bobbing, carved iron, and a small board with marks like lizard hands, like little lights at the end of a hall signaling pigs to squeal hope of land. Through day we landed and saw the lizards upright, like sideways Fs or Ys upside down, crimping their necks to look at us. Impossible, words by force, by fish chopping the water around us all. My Christ, my surrendering fish, I see what you signal, to take the dinosaurs by force. Tuesday, Saturday, October 13. To a broken planet came men, bellies and long hair, carved like spears, all wet, all playing games. They are a pleasure to watch, so flat, so slender, so fast. They split my world in two, into a dead body hiding in my skin. Wednesday, Sunday, October 14th. The island, sick, fearful, shouts to us, coming from heaven for help to us. Thursday, Monday, October 15th. And the 2 day names are because the days of the week for me writing this book in 2016, 2015, I don't remember, don't coincide with the days of the week in Columbus in 1492. So that's why I say Thursday, Monday, right? Because there's not coincide even though the dates coincide. Thursday, Monday, October 15th. Anchor, daylight, free from shoals, hoisted sails, bracelets, legs and arms, crystals, the shape of diamonds, I touched to make them shudder and look away, and I could take what I want. Bracelets on their arms and legs, in their ears, noses, and around their necks, plus some dry sliced leaves they prize. Friday and Saturday, Tuesday and Wednesday, October 16th. Watching an airplane crash is like what I feel watching their canoes off the coast subtending, making wobbly half circles inside me, bags of human shit hanging from my lungs. I don't know how to describe it. The explosive fire across the water. Have you ever seen a plane crash? I haven't, but I fear what it feels like seeing all those people dip down. And now I'm going to end my reading of this book with a passage that, so I always thought that once you write a book, that book is done, its words are always set for all time, and I had this real hard distinction between the written page and the oral, and I always understood the oral to be that which is mutable, more dynamic, subject to change, and the written word, right, that which is in print, to be somehow calcified, set. That idea was displaced for me when my dog, she's dead now, when she was dying, I tried to ceremonialize her death a few years ago by playing Pharaoh Sanders and reading poetry to her as I held her in my arms dying. And this was the poem that I read for her, which is now my dog dying poem. Right? Even though I didn't write it to be that, and I was obviously working in this other framework, it became something else. So I'll read this before reading a few of the Cantara's translations. I am the serpent who tastes its own eye. My fire stares out from destruction. I awaken to it like humanity to its loneliness, stretching over counters and across streets. I walk as if with feet into its sun and wind destroying me. I disparage the sunlight, step on my own back and push my face into the dirt. I try again to rise up like a tree to its bifurcations, splitting to prayer in silence, whispering, and then I step off, a star falling to earth, a meteor headed through the mesosphere to collision with my crawling shape. My body is fish through open air. I am silenced by my upper neck. There is some kind of swimming there. I follow deeper into the water, where I dream that I am a fat turtle swinging my ass through piles of leaves. I laugh, sticking my head into a shell while a boy walks by, not noticing me. I remember many things that have happened to me. Sometimes I experience deja vu 30 or 40 times a day. When I crawl off to calm myself, I stop again, thinking, I've already tried crawling this way and without avail. My tongue presses frustrated worms against the roof of my mouth, but I prefer the water. My body is fish with hardened scales. Inside, its liver regenerate the folds to be used for prophecy. I read the folds on the tissue of blood and write the meaning out on the sand. Hominids squat to see my translation, but they do not understand. They watch me go back and forth on a platform. That beast, they whisper to themselves. I am beast with hot breath in the cool dawn. My power animal is the gnat. The land flows out from its eye in deltas of piercing angle. His wings cut across the wind like scissors, erratic and glittering. They fly up from the grass and circle above me, looking down, shining eyes fearless and dull, a faint blur through the clear sky. I follow him and share his fearlessness and exaltation. When the mold thickens around my eye, I lose him. I wait, dimmed by the fading light, until I find him again, twisting like a raised blade of grass in the luminous air. He grows out of it like a cloud. It is cool like the dawn, if it can be that the dawn is seen to be inclined vertically like a pool. I bend my head into the pool, entering the hollow but stop halfway. Half of me inside with the other half out, half a clock of blood thuds in time cradled beside a silent twin. There is no speaking to him then, powerful and without form. Mist from silence issues effect without words. It collects dissipated moisture to my throne. Pulling back, I am taken with a thought onto the throne, cool on my ass, and I hear him like a creature walking around on the roof above me. The roof is palatial, and although I am in it, I am not of it. Like a cock from its coop, my boned feet to exposure step where I follow. I am thrilled by the howl of coyotes, although I fear them more than anything else. Those who walk silently in the shimmer of the moon force my ear wide open to the subtlest pieces of sound, the breath of trees and the hissing of shadows, all over the hills swallowed whole by my mind. I am voracious for tones, parallels, and perpendiculars. My claws leave definite lines measuring infinitude and miniature perceptions. I get ecstatic in attention in spite of myself. I am winged. I see it in the mirror. Still, every time it shocks me, I coil my wings into shells, a form of fire. If I had a hood, I'd hear a roar of lions when I pulled it back from my neck. The story of the fish who ate the sea, or the rabbit who swallowed the limbless fish. The tide is itself, and its opposite and forcible bend, the people pushing toward refutation, meager push while an eel dreams of limbs. And now, I'm going to end with some lighter poems. These are just a few translations from the Cantara's Mexicanos, which is a 16th century collection of courtly songs as remembered by people who had experienced 50 years of colonialism. Right? So you'd have the Spanish in central Mexico for about half a century when someone had the idea to gather up the songs in secret, of course, because these songs, in many cases, were associated with indigenous religions that had by then been outlawed, so they were collected about 50 years into the colonial project. So they've got this weird feel of both like looking back and possibly, in many instances, recreating that which had been lost. I imagine them with a very kind of courtly, humorous air. I see them as an attempt to remind their listeners of an ecology and song in which humor still filled the air. They're also really mad sometimes. They have a lot of political critique, not just of the Spaniards, but also of all these different groups, ethnic groups within central Mexico who just kept fighting each other amidst the bigger enemy in the room. This song is called Conscientious Objector. Your magnificence I can barely address in my shallow loneliness. How thin what I might then expect from you is, famous Tetlapantzecatzequitzin. You were called to this earth a while to live in a child's peace, but then the fashions dressed you up, and well you wore the war skirt and sash, but the bare truth is there's war, always war with its rage and hate, modifying even how friends congregate. I saw you, Tetlapantzecatzequitzin, in troubled straits and speaking straight, I said less than manly things. To hell with empire and its overgrowth. To hell with the flowers that conurbate. To hell with the south and east. God damn them that injunct our ease with commands to obtain without cause, to siege, to bring bloody rain on neighbors' walls. You wanted all that, but not for itself. The problem is, though war we might hate, it's in war we learn whom to celebrate. Ah, hence this. Tetlapantzecatzequitzin. Number 8. A politician has little to do when gone are the old retinues. A hairdresser has little to fix when gone are the catoptrics. How could one leader perceive a people who no longer see themselves in the mirror, let alone see themselves in each other? Would that I could fetch old glass, shattered by the new rubrics. I'd put it back together at last, and this be called iconoclastic. Yes, we've got new life in Christ, precious life, a blessing of the homogenists. To put our memories back in order would break the spell of those one-sayers. Would that I could fetch old shards. I'd take them to the underworld and show them to the princes there, sleeping shattered to converse. This one, the next one, is one of my favorite ones. Number 9. Truest regrets, I'm always upset. Apologies, I'm perpetually surly. I try to help myself, and yet no luck reaches me particularly. I don't necessarily want for riches. I wail, and it's ruefully wretched. It's time to die, I worry. I may be then again with old friends, happy, fortunate in their company. Here I hurry to scarcely depend on the cheap will of inane functionaries. I've never had the spirit nor the friends. I wail, and it's timidly out of tune. It's time I die, I think. Let no one's heart be hurt to hear it. My blues aren't specially unique. I caught a bad wind somewhere in my orbits, and now I'm just another planet oblique. And one last one. 33. Imagine yourself in a soap apple, squished in its whorled buttonhole, dappled with its tinctured principle, its branches peopled with quetzals, eagle, and Christianly owl. How will you make your way back from that to the valley of Anahuac? you're singing there today, but even the trace of your jingle this way is marked by a tingle of being somewhat unaware. You are born there, shine there, and somehow your mind there is caught still in the cavernous, winding, impersonal grapple of the soap apple that ensanguines there. Thank you.
Who are some of your contemporary poetic influences?
A lot of poets who think about their poetry in an embodied way, right? To think about the Poetic project as an embodied project. So Rodrigo Toscano is a friend and an influence, but also Ariana Reigns is somebody that I very much admire and follow. Yeah, poets who, Rodrigo told me something that stayed with me for a long time. And it was this conversation that we were having about like where he got his performative ideas from. And he told me about this, I guess a choreographer or a theater director called Grotowski. Do you all know Grotowski? The poor people's theater, right? Polish poor people's theater. And he gave me this idea that Grotowski would tell his students, when you speak, when you talk, right, don't speak with your mouth, right? Imagine your elbows sending your voice out into the side of the room, right? Imagine like your hips, like, you know, speaking forward. And, you know, even if I'm not like, you know, an actor and moving around, that idea that the medium for the poem is the body has stayed with me. So I would say that, you know, that's a big influence for me. Thank you.
I want to hear a little bit more about the Blythe and Taglio. I had never heard about them, and I'm really, really interested in if you could just expand a little bit more on those.
Yeah,
please.
they're a
Thank you.
mystery. They're a real mystery. The most conservative, right, smallest number for how old they are is 500 to 600 years old, and the most liberal is about 1,500 years old. It's unknown who made them originally, but they are now used or engaged with by the Colorado River's Indian Tribe Coalition, right, which includes Mojave, Chemehuevi, Hopi, and maybe Diné. I don't remember the fourth one. But they are a site of cultural, spiritual engagement that the U.S. government doesn't want to have anything to do with, right? There's like, there's no kind of protective apparatus. So this guy, Figueroa, has a memorandum of understanding with the Bureau of the Interior where they basically said, you want to deal with it, you deal with it. So he's the caretaker for the glyphs. Before he came and kind of started, mobilizing around them, there were two big problems. They were ATVs, right? People were just driving their ATVs out in the Sonoran Desert, and solar farms, which wanted to come in, right, into the sun-rich California desert, which was a big hazard for some of these glyphs because there are some that are easily accessible by road, but there are a lot that are kind of like deeper in the desert that not everybody knows about. And it's not just the glyphs, because he believes that the glyphs were made by the those original peoples, but those original peoples came out of the caves in those Big Maria Mountains, right, in the background of those images, in the caves of Chicomostoc. Right? And he's like adamant that he believes this. For me, I don't know that I believe it. Right? And for a long time, I struggled. Well, how do I engage this academically, right? Objectively? How can I tell this story and not let it be like overlaid with my, I don't know, like this desire or need to fact check, right? And that's when I kind of started saying, well, no, this is a story, right? I'm going to tell my story about the story that I heard, rather than the academic disquisition that seeks to dispel the meaning of these glyphs for Figueroa and his family and for the other people of his area. I recently learned. Do you guys know who the Hardy Boys are? The sort of Hardy Boys, little like detective kids, young adult detective fiction from like the 50s and the 60s. There's a Hardy Boys novel that's set at the Blythe Intaglios. It's just kind of a silly thing. So yeah.
Are there any more besides those?
Yes.
In the U.S.
Of those like.
That kind of, that sort of style.
Yeah, so they're rarer, right? So they're more like the Nazca lines in Peru. More often what you get in the North America, right? In North America are earthworks, right? The mounds, the things that kind of pile up and are like, either effigies or ceremonial sites. It's rare that you get the kind of the scratching into the earth that these are, made with, and that the Nazca lines are made with. So yeah, they're rarer. They're rarer. And they're phenomenal. They have people figures, animal figures, spirit figures, and geometrical designs just out there in the Sonoran Desert, right between California and Arizona along the Colorado River. Yeah.
The last few pieces that you read, you referred to as translations, and I'm trying to decide if you mean that literally or your impressions of earlier writing, and can you kind of share the process of how you take the earlier writing and create your own work out of it?
Totally. I was frustrated with how academic all the other extant translations of the Cantaras Mexicanos are, too literal, too overspecifying, so that you don't get the music. And what I wanted to bring out was the music, right? These are songs, and if I'm gonna translate a song, I want it to sound like a song. And so my approximation for 16th century, mid-16th century courtly music is Elizabethan England, right? So I've kind of thought, well, what would this sound like in English of that time, right? So I'm trying to, contextually translate to bring it into this, soundscape that I think would be the approximate equivalent of the soundscape of these courtly songs in central Mexico in the 1550s. For sure, they're not like written in rhyme, like Elizabethan poems, like Shakespeare, but the vibe is what I'm trying to get across. And of course the meaning too, but kind of to make them pleasurable, which they are, make them funny, which they are, make them humorous, which they are, and not just like academic exercise and understanding, right? Yeah.
All right, well, if we've got no more questions, thank you so much.
Thank you
for
all.
joining us. And next Thursday will be our next performance.
Thank you so much.